I'm Margaret Sullivan, 52, and I thought I'd raised my daughter to respect family and memory. 3 years after losing my husband David in a car accident, I'm still learning to navigate life alone while cherishing the few precious reminders I have of our 18-year marriage. Yesterday, I came home from work to find my jewelry box open and David's wedding ring missing. The simple gold band I'd kept alongside my own as a symbol of our eternal bond. When I confronted my 19-year-old daughter Emma, her words cut deeper than any blade. "Mom, dead husband's jewelry is just taking up space. I sold it to pay for concert tickets. He's not coming back." What Emma doesn't know is that David's ring contained a secret that would change everything about our family's future. Like and subscribe if you've ever faced the ultimate betrayal from someone you trusted most. The empty jewelry box sat on my dresser like an open wound. I stared at the faded velvet where David's ring had rested for 3 years, right beside my own wedding band that I still wore every day. My hands trembled as I touched the indentation in the fabric, as if somehow the ring might materialize if I pressed hard enough. "Emma!" I called out, my voice cracking. She was in the kitchen, casually eating cereal as if she hadn't just torn my heart out. "What now, Mom?" she said without looking up from her phone. "Where is your father's ring?" The spoon clinked against her bowl. "I told you I sold it. God, you're so dramatic about everything." The casualness in her voice hit me like a physical blow. 3 years ago, when the police officer handed me David's personal effects from the accident, that ring had been the only thing that still felt warm, still carried his essence. I'd held it to my chest in the hospital corridor and made a promise to keep it safe forever. Dramatic? The word came out as a whisper. "Emma." That ring was all I had left of him. She finally looked up, rolling her eyes. "Mom, you have pictures. You have memories. You don't need some old piece of jewelry collecting dust." She stood up, rinsing her bowl in the sink. "Besides, Dad would want me to be happy, right? And these concert tickets are going to make me really happy." I watched her walk away, her blonde hair bouncing with each step, and felt something inside me crack. Not just my heart, something deeper. Some fundamental belief I'd held about the daughter I'd raised, about the values I thought I'd instilled in her. David had always been the disciplinarian. I was the nurturer, the one who said yes when he said no, who slipped her extra money when he thought she'd had enough. After he died, I'd tried to be both parents, but mostly I'd just been the yes parent twice over. Standing there in the kitchen, I realized that my grief had made me weak, and my weakness had made Emma cruel. The silence in the house felt suffocating. I walked to the living room where David's photo sat on the mantel. Our last anniversary picture, his arm around me, both of us laughing at something I couldn't remember anymore. I picked up the frame, running my thumb over his face. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the photograph. "I let her do this. I let her think your memory doesn't matter." But even as I said it, I knew this was about more than just a ring. This was about respect, about boundaries, about the woman I'd become since losing him. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being Margaret Sullivan, David's equal partner, and become just Emma's pushover mother. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, "Going out with friends." Don't wait up. No apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just the assumption that life would continue as normal, that I would continue to accept whatever she decided to dish out. I set David's photo back on the mantel and made a decision. Tomorrow, I would find out where she sold the ring. Tomorrow, I would start fighting back. That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself in the closet, pulling down the photo albums I'd packed away after David's funeral. The wedding album fell open to our first dance, and suddenly, I was 24 again, spinning in his arms to "At Last" by Etta James. We'd met at the library of all places. I was a graduate student in education, buried under research papers, when this tall man with kind eyes asked if I could help him find books on small business management. David had just inherited his father's struggling auto repair shop and was determined to turn it around. What started as study sessions became coffee dates, then long walks, then a love that felt like coming home. "You're going to think I'm crazy," he'd said on our third date, "but I'm going to marry you someday." I'd laughed, but something in his certainty made my heart skip. David never said anything he didn't mean. The early years were hard. The shop barely broke even, and I was teaching at an elementary school for practically nothing. We lived in a tiny apartment where the heat didn't work properly, and the neighbors were too loud. But we were happy. David would come home with grease under his fingernails, and I'd have papers to grade scattered across our kitchen table, but we'd clear a space for dinner and talk about our dreams. "Someday," he'd say, gesturing with his fork, "we're going to have a house with a big kitchen where you can spread out all your school stuff and a garage where I can work on cars just for fun instead of survival." By our 5th anniversary, the shop was thriving. David had a gift for fixing things, but more than that, he had a gift for treating people fairly. In a business known for taking advantage of customers, David's honesty made him rich. Not wealthy exactly, but comfortable enough that I could quit teaching and go back to school for my master's degree. Emma came along when we'd been married 10 years. We'd tried for so long that we'd almost given up hope. David cried when I told him, actual tears streaming down his face as he lifted me up and spun me around the kitchen of the house we'd finally bought. The one with the big kitchen and the garage, just like he'd promised. He was such a devoted father. Every school play, every soccer game, every scraped knee got his full attention. But he never spoiled her the way I did. "She needs to understand that things have value, Maggie," he'd say when I wanted to buy her something expensive. "Money isn't magic. It comes from work, from respect, from treating people right." I flipped through more pages, finding photos of family vacations, Christmas mornings, ordinary Tuesday dinners that had felt like celebrations because we were together. In every picture, David's wedding ring caught the light. That simple gold band that had seen 18 years of dishes washed, cars fixed, homework helped, and bills paid. But there had been mysteries too. Phone calls he'd take in the garage, business meetings that ran late, documents he'd file away without much explanation. "Just boring business stuff, sweetheart," he'd say when I'd ask. "Nothing you need to worry about." I'd trusted him completely. Never questioned the boundaries he drew around his work life. The last photo in the album was from Emma's 16th birthday party, just months before the accident. David had his arm around both of us, and we were all laughing at something ridiculous Emma had said. He looked so alive, so permanent. How could someone so solid, so essential, just disappear on a random Tuesday morning when his car hit a patch of ice? I closed the album and held it against my chest. Tomorrow I would track down his ring, but tonight I needed to remember why it mattered so much. It wasn't just jewelry. It was proof that real love had existed, that David Sullivan had chosen me every single day for 18 years, and that some things were too sacred to be sold for concert tickets. The next morning, I drove through every pawn shop in town. It took 4 stops before I found the right one. A dingy place called Cash Quick, squeezed between a laundromat and a discount liquor store. The moment I described David's ring, the owner's eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh, yeah, the Sullivan ring. Pretty young blonde girl brought it in yesterday afternoon." He was a thin man with suspicious eyes, the kind who'd probably seen every sob story in the book. Told me it was her father's, said he'd passed and the family needed quick cash. My stomach clenched. She lied. That ring belonged to my husband. And she had no right to sell it. The man shrugged. "Look, lady, I hear stories like this every day. Girl had an ID, new details about the ring. Far as I was concerned, it was a legitimate transaction. Where is it now? Sold it this morning to a collector. Guy comes in once a week looking for vintage pieces." He leaned against the counter, completely unmoved by my distress. "Paid your daughter $60 for it, sold it for $300. Not bad for a day's work? $60. David's wedding ring, the symbol of 18 years of love, commitment, and partnership, had been traded for $60 and concert tickets. I felt dizzy with rage and grief. "I need the collector's information. I'll pay whatever he wants to get it back." The owner laughed. "Can't give out customer information, that's private. Please." I could hear the desperation in my own voice. "That ring means everything to me. Tell you what," he said, pulling out a business card. "This is the guy who bought it. Name's Harold Chen, runs an antique jewelry business. Maybe you can work something out with him." He handed me the card. With a smirk. "Course, he's probably going to want more than $300 for it now that he knows it's got sentimental value." I clutched the card like a lifeline and practically ran out of the shop. In my car, I called Harold Chen immediately. "Mrs. Sullivan?" His voice was kind, patient. "Yes, I did purchase a wedding band yesterday. When the pawn shop owner described your situation, I wondered if something like this might happen. He paused. I have a daughter myself. I can't imagine the pain you're feeling. Please, Mr. Chen. I'll pay whatever you ask. That ring is all I have left of my husband. Actually, I'd like to meet with you if possible. There's something unusual about this ring that I think you should know about. Something beyond its sentimental value. My heart stopped. What do you mean? The inside of the band has some very small engravings that aren't typical for a wedding ring. Numbers and letters that look like, well, like coordinates or a code. Of some kind. I've been in this business for 30 years, and I've never seen anything quite like it. Coordinates. David had been obsessed with geocaching in the months before he died, always talking about hidden treasures and secret locations. But why would he engrave coordinates in his wedding ring? I'm coming over right now, I said. Harold Chen's shop was in the historic district, a narrow building filled with glass cases of vintage jewelry and antique watches. He was a small elderly man with gentle hands and careful eyes. When he brought out David's ring, I nearly cried with relief just to see it again. Look here, he said, handing me a magnifying glass. On the inside of the band, I peered through the lens and saw them, tiny numbers and letters etched so small they were almost invisible. 42.3601, 71.0589, 847B. Those are definitely GPS coordinates, Harold said. And that last part looks like a location identifier. Your husband was very specific about what he wanted to remember. I stared at the numbers, my mind racing. David had never mentioned engraving anything in his ring. What had been so important that he'd literally carry it with him everywhere, hidden against his skin? Mr. Chen, how much do you want for the ring? He smiled and pushed it across the counter toward me. Nothing. Take it. And when you figure out what those coordinates mean, I hope it brings you peace. I slipped David's ring onto my right hand, next to my own wedding band, and felt him with me again. But now, instead of just grief, I felt something else. Curiosity. David had left me a message, hidden in plain sight for 3 years. It was time to find out what my husband had been trying to tell me. Emma breezed through the front door at nearly midnight, laughing loudly with friends as they dropped her off. She was wearing a new outfit I'd never seen before. Expensive jeans and a designer top that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. The sound of her heels on the hardwood announced her arrival like she owned the place. Emma, we need to talk, I said from the living room. Ugh, Mom, can't it wait? I'm exhausted. She kicked off her shoes, leaving them right in the middle of the hallway where I'd trip over them in the morning. No, it cannot wait. Sit down. Something in my tone must have registered because she actually paused, looking at me with surprise. I held up David's ring, watching her face carefully. Where did you get the money for that outfit? She glanced down at her clothes, then back at me with a defiant shrug. What's it matter? You always said Dad would want me to be happy. I got the ring back, Emma. All of it. I know you sold it for $60 and spent the money on concert tickets. I also know you've been charging things to credit cards I didn't know you had. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Emma had always been beautiful. David's blonde hair and blue eyes, but with a sharpness that hadn't been there when she was little. Somewhere in the past few years, entitlement had hardened. Her features made her calculating. You went through my stuff? She demanded, recovering quickly. That's invasion of privacy. You stole from me. That ring wasn't yours to take. Dad's dead, Mom. The words exploded out of her like she'd been holding them back for years. He's been dead for 3 years, and you act like he's coming back. That ring was just sitting there doing nothing, and I needed money. I studied my daughter's face, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in years. When had she become so cruel? When had my grief blinded me to the monster I was raising? You needed money for what exactly? You live in my house rent-free. I pay for your car, your insurance, your phone, your food. What could you possibly need that justified stealing your father's wedding ring? I shouldn't have to ask permission. For everything! She threw herself onto the couch dramatically. All my friends have parents who just give them money when they need it. Sarah's mom bought her a whole new wardrobe last month just because. Jess got a credit card with no limit for her 18th birthday. And what makes you think you deserve the same thing? The question seemed to genuinely confuse her. Because I'm your daughter? Because you're supposed to take care of me? There it was. the entitlement that had been growing like a cancer in our family. After David died, I'd tried to compensate for her loss by never saying no, never setting boundaries, never making her face consequences. I'd thought I was being a loving mother, but I'd actually been raising a stranger. Emma, do you have any idea what that ring meant to me? It's just jewelry, Mom. And Dad's not coming back to wear it. The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a slap. Just jewelry? That ring represented 18 years of marriage. It was on his finger when he promised to love me forever. It was there when you were born, when he held you for the first time and cried because he was so happy. She rolled her eyes. You're being so dramatic. Dead people don't need jewelry, but living people need to remember love. Living people need to honor the promises that shaped their lives. I stood up, towering over her for once. Your father worked 18-hour days to build something for this family. He sacrificed and saved and planned so that you and I would be taken care of. And you think that legacy is worth $60? Whatever. She started to get up, but I blocked her path. We're not done. You're going to get a job, Emma. A real job. You're going to pay me back for everything you've charged to those credit cards, and you're going to start contributing to this household. She laughed, actually laughed. Good luck with that. I'm 19 years old, Mom. You can't make me do anything. You're right. I can't make you. But I can stop enabling you. As of tomorrow, your credit cards are canceled. Your car keys are mine. And your phone is getting shut off. You want to act like an adult? Start paying adult bills. For the first time since she'd walked in, Emma looked genuinely shocked. You wouldn't. Try me. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. Finally, she stormed toward the stairs. Fine. But when I move out and never speak to you again, don't come crying to me. Emma, I called after her. She paused on the steps. Your father died believing he was raising a daughter who would grow up to be kind, generous, and strong. Don't prove him wrong. She disappeared upstairs, and I heard her door slam. I sat back down in the quiet living room, David's ring heavy on my finger, and realized that getting it back was just the beginning. I had a daughter to save. And apparently, I had 18 years of bad parenting to undo. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with David's ring, my laptop, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The coordinates from the ring were burned into my memory. 423601, 710589, 847B. I'd already plugged them into Google Maps and discovered they pointed to a location in downtown Boston, about an hour's drive from our house. But it was the 847B that puzzled me most. It wasn't part of the coordinates. It had to be something else. A code, an address, a password. I decided to start with David's papers. In the 3 years since his death, I'd barely touched the filing cabinet in his home office. It had felt too much like invading his privacy, like disturbing a shrine. But now, with questions swirling in my mind, I pulled out drawer after drawer of meticulously organized documents. David had always been organized, but this was something else entirely. Every receipt, every contract, every piece of correspondence was labeled, dated, and filed with obsessive precision. As I dug deeper, I found folders I'd never seen before. Investment properties, business partnerships, trust documents. Investment properties? We owned our house, free and clear. But I'd never known about any other real estate. I opened the folder with trembling hands and found deed after deed. A duplex in Cambridge, a small apartment building in Somerville, a commercial property in downtown Boston. Properties worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that I'd never heard. Of the business partnerships folder was even more shocking. David hadn't just owned one auto repair shop. He'd owned 5, scattered across eastern Massachusetts. Each one was managed by someone else, each one generating steady income that was being deposited into accounts I'd never heard of. But it was the trust documents that made me sit down hard in David's desk chair. The Sullivan Family Trust, established 12 years ago, with David as trustee and me as beneficiary. The value listed on the most recent statement made me gasp. $2.3 million, $2.3 million. We'd been living on my teacher's salary and the income from what I thought was David's single auto shop while he'd been quietly building an empire. All these years, I'd clipped coupons and worried about utility bills, while David had been sitting on enough money to buy a mansion. My phone rang, startling me from my stupor. It was David's lawyer, Richard Hartwell, returning a call I'd made an hour earlier. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm so sorry for your loss. I know it's been 3 years, but David spoke of you so often. How can I help you today?" "Mr. Hartwell, I've been going through David's papers, and I'm finding things I don't understand. Properties, businesses, something called the Sullivan Family Trust?" There was a pause. "You mean David never discussed his financial arrangements?" "With you? He told me he had one auto shop. That's all I knew." Another pause, longer this time. "Mrs. Sullivan, I think we need to meet in person. There are some things about your husband's estate that you need to understand. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" As I drove to Boston an hour later, my mind was reeling. The coordinates from David's ring had led me to a financial district address, and now I was learning that my husband had been far wealthier than I'd ever imagined. Why had he kept this from me? What else had he hidden? Richard Hartwell's office was on the 32nd floor of a gleaming downtown building. He was a distinguished man in his 60s, with kind eyes and an expensive suit. The moment I walked in, he stood and took my hands in his. "Margaret, I can't tell you how many times David talked about you. He was so proud of your work as a teacher, so protective of your generous heart." "Protective?" He gestured for me to sit. "Your husband was a brilliant businessman, but more than that, he was a man who understood people. He knew that if you'd been aware of his wealth, you would have wanted to share it with your family, with friends in need, with every worthy cause that crossed your path. And that would have been wrong? Not wrong, just dangerous." David had seen what money could do to families. He watched his own parents lose relationships over inheritance disputes. He was determined to protect you from that kind of pressure. Richard pulled out a thick folder. "The truth is, Margaret, you're a very wealthy woman. The trust David established has grown substantially over the years. Between the properties, the businesses, and the investments, you're worth approximately $4 million. $4 million. I felt dizzy. "But why the secrecy? Why the coordinates hidden in his ring?" Richard smiled sadly. "David was paranoid about something happening to him. The coordinates lead to a safety deposit box that contains cash and the original trust documents. He wanted to make sure that if anything ever happened to both of us, you'd have a way to access everything." "Box 847B? Exactly," I thought about. Emma's cruel words. Dead husband's jewelry is just taking up space. If she only knew that David's space had been protecting our entire future. "There's one more thing," Richard said. "David left very specific instructions about how this information should be shared with you. He was worried about people taking advantage of your kindness, particularly certain family members." "What kind of instructions?" "He wanted you to have time to process this information, to decide for yourself how you wanted to handle your wealth. He specifically mentioned concerns about your daughter's spending habits and your extended family's expectations." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. He saw this coming, didn't he? He knew Emma would grow up entitled, knew my family would keep treating me like their personal ATM. "David loved you both, but he wasn't blind to the challenges you'd face as a widow with a teenage daughter." Richard handed me a sealed envelope. "He wrote you a letter, to be given to you when you discovered the truth about the trust." With shaking hands, I opened the envelope and read David's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you found my little insurance policy. I know you're probably angry that I kept this from you, but I hope you'll understand. You have the most generous heart of anyone I've ever known, and I couldn't bear the thought of people taking advantage of that. This money isn't just for you. It's for your freedom. The freedom to say no to people who would use you, the freedom to help others on your own terms, the freedom to live without fear. Be strong, my love. Be smart. And remember that the most valuable thing I ever owned was your heart. David." I sat in that office and cried. For David, for the years I'd struggled unnecessarily, for the truth I was only now discovering. My husband had been protecting me even from beyond the grave, and I was finally beginning to understand just how much I'd underestimated the man I'd married. The bank was a fortress of marble and brass, the kind of place where whispered conversations carried the weight of millions. Richard had called ahead, and the branch manager personally escorted me to the safety deposit box area. Box 847B was in the very back, behind 2 locked doors and a security guard who checked my identification 3 times. When the manager inserted his key alongside mine and the box slid open, I gasped. Inside were neat stacks of cash, more money than I'd ever seen in one place. $50 bills bound with rubber bands, arranged like a drug dealer's cash in a movie. Beneath the money were legal documents, each one in a clear protective sleeve. "Your time, Mrs. Sullivan," the manager said, closing the privacy door behind him. I lifted out the first stack of bills with trembling hands. There had to be $50,000 in cash, maybe more. Why had David felt the need to keep this much money hidden away? The documents underneath provided the answer. The first folder contained papers I recognized from David's office. Trust, documents, property deeds, business incorporation papers. But there were others here that I'd never seen. Insurance policies worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Stock certificates from companies I'd never heard of. Bank statements from accounts. In the Cayman Islands. My husband had offshore accounts. I sat down heavily in the small chair provided for box holders and tried to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just wealth. This was sophisticated financial planning that bordered on the secretive. David hadn't just been protecting me from family pressure. He'd been protecting his assets from something else entirely. In the very back of the box, I found a second letter addressed to me, this one thicker than the first. Inside was a detailed explanation written in David's careful handwriting. "Maggie, if you've found this box, it means you've already spoken to Richard and learned about the trust. What you're seeing here is my emergency fund. Money that can't be traced, can't be frozen, can't be taken away if something goes wrong with the legal stuff. I know this probably looks suspicious, but everything here was earned legitimately and taxes were paid on all of it." The letter went on to explain how David had become paranoid about asset protection after seeing several successful business owners lose everything in lawsuits. He'd consulted with financial advisors who specialized in protecting wealth from creditors, ex-spouses, and what he called professional victims who might target successful people with frivolous claims. "The cash is for emergencies only," the letter continued. "The offshore accounts are legal and properly reported, but they're harder for someone to find if they come looking. I never told you about any of this because I didn't want you to worry. And I didn't want you to feel like we were doing anything wrong. We weren't. We were just being careful." David had been planning for every contingency, including ones I'd never even considered. What if someone sued his business? What if there was a market crash? What if I needed money quickly and couldn't access the trust? He'd been 3 steps ahead of problems that might never have materialized. But there was more. At the bottom of the box was a small notebook filled with David's handwriting, page after page of observations about people in our lives, including members of my family. My brother Tom, who'd been asking about our finances more often lately. My sister Linda, who'd made comments about how teachers don't make much money and maybe I should ask David for help with her mortgage. Even Emma's behavior was documented. Spending more than she earns, expects money without earning it, doesn't understand the value of work. David had been watching, evaluating, protecting me from influences I hadn't even recognized as threats. The notebook contained specific instructions about how to handle each family member if they came asking for money after his death. "Tom will want a loan for his business," one entry read. "Don't do it. He's never paid back money in his life, and he'll consider any loan a gift. If you want to help him, offer to pay for business classes or consulting, but never cash." About Linda. "She'll play the single mother card and make you feel guilty. Remind her that she chose to quit her job and that her ex-husband is responsible for child support, not you." And about Emma. "She needs to learn that love and money are 2 different things. If you give her everything she wants, you'll raise a person who can't function in the real world. Make her earn what she gets." I closed the notebook, overwhelmed by the complexity of David's planning. He'd been protecting me from manipulations I hadn't even seen coming, preparing me for battles I hadn't known I'd have to fight. The final item in the box was a small velvet pouch. Inside was a second ring. Not a wedding band, but a signet ring with an intricate design. Attached was a note. This was my grandfather's ring. He built his business from nothing and taught me that wealth is responsibility, not privilege. If Emma ever proves she understands this lesson, give it to her. If not, save it for a grandchild who might be wiser. I put everything back in the box except for $20,000 in cash and David's grandfather's ring. Walking out of that bank, I felt like a different person. Not just because I was wealthy, but because I understood now that David had been preparing me for this moment for years. He'd known that someday I'd need to be the strong one, the one who said no, the one who protected what we'd built together. The coordinates in his wedding ring hadn't just led me to money. They'd led me to the blueprint for the woman I needed to become. That night, I sat in David's office, surrounded by financial documents I finally understood, and realized that my real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the wisdom to know what to do with it. Armed with David's notebook and a new understanding of my family dynamics, I decided to test his observations. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, my brother Tom called with what he described as an incredible business opportunity. "Maggie, I've got a chance to buy into a food truck franchise," he said, his voice bubbling with the kind of enthusiasm that usually preceded a request for money. "The guy selling it says I can make back my investment in 6 months, maybe less." "That sounds interesting, Tom. How much does it cost?" "Well, that's the thing. I need about $30,000 for the buy-in, plus equipment." I was hoping. Since David left you pretty well set up, I almost laughed out loud. David's prediction was unfolding exactly as he'd written it. "Tom, what makes you think David left me well set up?" "Come on, Maggie. The guy owned a successful business, had life insurance. You're probably sitting on a nice nest egg, and you think I should invest it in your food truck? It's not an investment. It's family helping family. When was the last time I asked you for anything?" I flipped through David's notebook to Tom's section. "Let's see. There was the $5,000 you needed for your motorcycle 3 years ago that you never paid back. The $2,000 for your girlfriend's car repairs. The $800 for your security deposit on the apartment you lost. 6 months later." Silence on the other end of the line. "Those were different situations," Tom said finally. "This is a real business opportunity. Tom, I love you, but David was right about you. You've never paid back a loan in your life because you don't think of them as loans. You think of them as gifts that your family owes you. That's not fair. Maggie, you're different now, colder. David's death changed you." "No, Tom. David's death woke me up. The answer is no." I hung up before he could argue further. Within an hour, my sister Linda called. "Tom told me you were mean to him about some business thing," she said without preamble. "What's gotten into you?" I told him I wouldn't give him $30,000 for a food truck. "How is that mean?" "Maggie, honey, we're family. We help each other out. You've always been the generous one." Linda had always been good at emotional manipulation, but now I could see the strings she was pulling. David's notebook had an entire page devoted to her tactics, playing the victim, using guilt about family loyalty, making requests seem reasonable by starting with larger ones. "Linda, are you calling to ask me for money too? Well, since you brought it up, Jessica needs braces and my ex is behind on child support again. I was hoping you might be able to help out with the down payment." "How much?" "Just $5,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but you don't have kids to worry about supporting, and I'm drowning here." There it was, the guilt trip about Emma not being a financial burden, the assumption that my life was easier than hers. "Linda, Jessica is 16 years old. Why is she just getting braces now? We couldn't afford them before, obviously. But now you can afford them if I pay for them? That's different. This is about my daughter's future." I looked at David's notes about Linda. "Uses her children as leverage, makes poor financial decisions, and expects family to bail her out. Has never considered that her spending on non-essentials might be the problem." "Linda, what did you spend money on last month?" What kind of question is that? A fair one. If you can't afford $5,000 for Jessica's braces, what are you spending your money on? I resent the implication that I'm irresponsible with money. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking directly. Are you being responsible with money? The silence stretched between us. Finally, Linda's voice turned cold. "I see what this is about. You've got money now, and it's made you think you're better than the rest of us." No, Linda, I've got perspective now, and it's made me realize that helping people who won't help themselves isn't actually helping anyone. Fine. When you come to your senses and remember what family means, you know my number. She hung up. And I sat staring at the phone, amazed at how accurately David had predicted these conversations. But the real test came that evening when Emma strolled into the kitchen and announced she was going shopping with friends. Shopping for what? I asked. Just stuff. I need some new things for summer. With what money? She looked at me like I'd asked a ridiculous question. I thought you could give me some cash. Why would you think that? Because you're my mom? Because I need things? Her voice was rising with that particular tone that usually made me cave in and hand over my credit card. But David's notebook had warned me about this too. Emma, you haven't had a job since you graduated high school a year ago. You don't contribute to household expenses. You stole and sold your father's wedding ring for concert tickets. Why exactly do you think you deserve shopping money? Because I'm your daughter and you're supposed to take care of me. I am taking care of you. You have a roof over your head, food in your stomach, and a car to drive. What you don't have is an unlimited entertainment budget funded by your mother. Emma stared at me like I'd grown a second head. What is wrong with you lately? Ever since you got Dad's stupid ring back, you've been acting like a different person. Maybe I'm acting like the person I was always supposed to be. The person your father expected me to be. Dad would have given me money if I asked for it. No, Emma. He wouldn't have. Your father believed in earning what you get, and he was right. She stormed out of the kitchen, and I heard her on the phone 20 minutes later, calling Tom and Linda, probably looking for allies in her campaign against my sudden unreasonableness. That night, I reread David's entire notebook, understanding. Now that it wasn't just financial planning, it was a psychology manual for dealing with people who had learned to see me as their personal bank account. David had been protecting me from my own generous nature, preparing me for the moment when I'd need to protect myself. The next morning, I got calls from both Tom and Linda, clearly orchestrated. Maggie, we're worried about you, Linda said. This isn't like you. Tom thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown, she continued, when I didn't respond. I'm having a breakthrough, not a breakdown, I said. I'm finally understanding the difference between helping people and enabling them. We just want the old Maggie back, the one who cared about family. The old Maggie is gone, I said quietly. And frankly, she should have died a long time ago. She was being used by people who claimed to love her, and she was too blind to see it. After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. For the first time since David's death, I wasn't carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations and problems. I was finally free to miss my husband without being anyone's ATM. Emma's reaction to my newfound boundaries escalated faster than I'd expected. When her credit cards were declined at the mall, she came home in a fury that shook the windows. You actually canceled them, she screamed, throwing her purse across the living room. I was humiliated in front of everyone. Good, I said calmly, not looking up from the book I was reading. Humiliation builds character. This is insane. I'm an adult. You can't control my life. You're absolutely right. You're an adult, which means you can get your own credit cards, your own apartment, and your own job to pay for them. She stood there sputtering, clearly expecting me to back down the way I always had before. When I didn't, she tried a different approach. Mom, I'm sorry about Dad's ring, okay? I know I messed up, but punishing me like this is crazy. This isn't punishment, Emma. This is parenting. Something I should have been doing for the past 3 years instead of trying to buy your happiness. What's that supposed to mean? I finally looked up from my book. It means I've been feeling so guilty about your father's death that I forgot my job isn't to make you happy. It's to raise you into a functioning adult. I am a functioning adult. Really? When was the last time you cooked your own meal, did your own laundry, or paid for anything yourself? When was the last time you had a job, Emma? A real job where you showed up on time and worked for 8 hours? She crossed her arms defensively. I've been focusing on figuring out my life path. For an entire year? While living rent-free and having all your expenses paid? Most parents support their kids through college. Most kids go to college, Emma. You chose not to, which is fine, but it doesn't mean you get to live like a trust fund baby while you figure out your life path. Over the next few days, Emma tried every manipulation tactic in her arsenal. She pouted, She raged, she gave me the silent treatment. She called my sister and brother, hoping they'd pressure me to give in. When that didn't work, she brought friends over to witness her unreasonable mother refusing to give her money. Emma's "Mom is being so mean," I heard her tell her friend Sarah in the kitchen. "She's acting like I'm some kind of burden just because I don't have a job." "Why don't you get one?" Sarah asked innocently. "That's not the point," Emma snapped. "The point is that she's my mother and she should want to help me." I appeared in the doorway. "Hello, Sarah." "Emma, can I speak with you privately?" Sarah practically fled, leaving Emma to face me alone. "Are you trying to turn my friends against me?" she demanded. "I'm trying to teach you that airing family business to your friends makes you look immature, not sympathetic. Everything I do is wrong now, isn't it?" "No, Emma. Everything you do has consequences now. There's a difference." That evening, I found Emma going through my desk in David's old office. She was rifling through papers with desperate urgency, clearly looking for something. "What are you doing?" She spun around, guilty and defiant. "I'm looking for Dad's life insurance information. I have a right to know what he left us." "No, you don't. You have a right to what I choose to give you, when I choose to give it, if you prove you can handle it responsibly." "That's not fair. I'm his daughter, and I'm his widow, which means I inherited everything, and I get to decide how it's distributed." Emma's face went pale. "You wouldn't cut me out of Dad's will. There is no will for you to be cut out of, Emma. Everything went to me, with the understanding that I would provide for you appropriately." "Appropriately?" "That means making sure you become a person your father would be proud of. Right now, that's not happening." The next morning, I discovered that Emma had tried to sell some of my jewelry while I was asleep. Thankfully, she'd only managed to take a few pieces before the 24-hour pawn shops closed, but the violation felt enormous. "Really, Emma? You're going to steal from me again?" She was caught red-handed with my jewelry box open and my pearl necklace in her hand. "I needed money for gas. My card got declined at the gas station and I was stranded." "So, you decided to steal my jewelry rather than call me for help? You would have just lectured me about getting a job. Because you need a job. Emma, you're 19 years old and you're acting like a child having a tantrum in a toy store." "I hate this," she screamed. "I hate how you've changed. Ever since you got Dad's stupid ring back, you've been a completely different person." "Good. The old person was weak and let you walk all over her. The new person remembers that your father raised you better than this." That afternoon, Emma packed a bag and announced she was going to stay with her friend Jessica for a while. "Fine," I said. "But understand that Jessica's parents aren't going to support you indefinitely. When you're ready to come home and follow the rules of this house, let me know." "Don't hold your breath," she shot back. After she left, I sat in the quiet house and felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in months, I didn't have to monitor my purse, my jewelry, or my credit cards. I didn't have to listen to demands for money or complaints about how unfair life was, but I also felt sad. Somewhere in the process of trying to compensate for David's death, I'd lost my daughter. Emma had become a stranger, entitled, manipulative, and cruel. The sweet little girl who used to help David in his garage and bring me dandelions from the yard had disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized. That night, I called Richard Hartwell. "I need to know about legal options," I told him. "If Emma continues down this path, I want to make sure she can't claim any inheritance until she proves she's mature enough to handle it." "David actually anticipated this possibility," Richard said gently. "The trust has provisions for delayed distribution based on specific criteria he outlined. Education, employment, demonstrated financial responsibility, things like that. He really did think of everything, didn't he? He loved you both, Margaret, but he understood that sometimes love means protecting people from themselves." As I hung up the phone, I realized that David had been preparing me for this moment too. The moment when I'd have to choose between being Emma's friend and being her mother. For 3 years, I'd chosen wrong. Now, finally, I was choosing the path that might actually save her. Richard Hartwell's office felt different the second time I visited. Where before I'd been overwhelmed by revelations about David's wealth, now I was focused on protecting it and protecting Emma from her own worst instincts. David was very specific about how he wanted Emma's inheritance handled, Richard explained, pulling out a thick folder marked Secondary Trust Provisions. He established what's essentially a graduated inheritance system. What does that mean? It means Emma doesn't get access to any significant money until she meets certain criteria. At age 21, she can access funds for education, but only if she's enrolled in college or trade school and maintaining good grades. At 25, she can access money for a house down payment, but only if she's been employed full-time for at least 2 consecutive years. Richard continued reading from David's detailed instructions. The bulk of her inheritance doesn't become available until she's 30, and even then, it's structured as annual distributions rather than a lump sum. David was very concerned about sudden wealth destroying her work ethic. And if she never meets the criteria, then the money goes to charitable organizations that you select. David believed that wealth should create productive members of society, not entitled ones. I thought about Emma storming out of the house, convinced that her father's death should have set her up for life without effort, if she only knew how. Carefully, David had planned to prevent exactly that scenario. There's something else, Richard said. David included provisions for what he called character emergencies. If Emma ever demonstrates what he defined as serious moral failings, stealing, drug addiction, financial irresponsibility, the trust can be restructured to delay her access even further. Stealing? My heart sank. You mean like selling his wedding ring without permission? Or taking your jewelry to pawn shops? Richard said gently, I assume that's why you're here today? I nodded. She's been escalating her behavior since I started setting boundaries. I'm afraid of what she might do next. Richard opened another file. David actually wrote you a letter about this specific situation. He asked me to give it to you if Emma's behavior ever required emergency intervention, as he put it. The letter was longer than the others, written in David's careful handwriting. My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, it means Emma has crossed a line that required you to consider legal protection of her inheritance. First, don't feel guilty. You're not being cruel. You're being loving in the hardest way possible. Emma's behavior isn't your fault. Teenagers who lose a parent often test boundaries in extreme ways, and I probably would have had to deal with this if I'd lived. What I want you to understand is that Emma's inheritance isn't really about money. It's about becoming the person she's capable of being. If she can access millions at 19, she'll never develop the skills she needs to be truly successful. She'll never know the satisfaction of earning something, never understand the value of hard work, never develop the character that comes from overcoming challenges. The trust isn't punishment, it's protection. Every successful person I've ever known had to struggle at some point, had to prove themselves, had to develop resilience. I don't want to deny Emma that opportunity by making life too easy, but here's what I really want you to know. Emma's inheritance will eventually be substantial. If she meets all the criteria, if she develops into the woman I believe she can become, she'll inherit approximately $1.5 million over her lifetime. That's enough to buy a house, start a business, educate her children, and live comfortably, but only if she proves she won't waste it. Be strong, my love. The Emma who's testing you now isn't the Emma I raised, and it's not the Emma you'll eventually get back. Sometimes people have to lose everything they take for granted before they can appreciate what they actually have. I wiped away tears as I finished reading. He really believed she'd come around? David was an optimist when it came to people he loved, Richard said. But he was also realistic about human nature. He built safeguards into every aspect of this trust because he understood that money reveals character. It doesn't create it. Richard showed me additional documents I'd never seen before. David had established education funds that would pay for any legitimate college or trade school Emma chose, but only with proof of enrollment and academic progress. He'd created an emergency fund for true crises, medical bills, car repairs, job loss, but with strict documentation requirements. Your husband essentially created a 20-year parenting plan from beyond the grave, Richard said. Every scenario Emma might face, every manipulation she might try, every excuse she might make, he thought of it all. What if she never changes? What if she continues down this path? Then she'll have chosen her path, and the money will go to causes that can actually make a difference in the world. David researched charities extensively, organizations that help at-risk youth, that provide job training, that support families dealing with loss. He figured if Emma wouldn't let the money help her become a better person, it should at least help other people do the same. As I drove home, I thought about the irony of Emma's situation. She was raging against boundaries and limitations, not knowing that her father had already provided for every aspect of her future, if she was willing to earn it. David had given her something more valuable than immediate access to money. He'd given her a roadmap to becoming someone worthy of wealth. That evening, I called Emma at Jessica's house. "I've been thinking about our situation," I told her. "Does that mean you're ready to stop being crazy and give me my credit cards back?" she asked hopefully. "No, it means I'm ready to explain what your father actually left you." "Finally! How much are we talking about?" "Potentially $1.5 million over your lifetime." Silence. Then, "Are you serious?" "Completely serious." "But there are conditions, Emma. Lots of them." "What kind of conditions?" "The kind that require you to become the person your father believed you could be. The kind that mean you'll have to work for what you get, prove you can handle responsibility, and demonstrate that you understand the difference between earning something and being entitled to it. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, sweetheart. But your father made sure it could be generous to people who are willing to grow up and earn generosity." I hung up before she could argue, hoping that somewhere in her anger and entitlement there was still the little girl who'd once told me she wanted to grow up to be just like Daddy. Word traveled fast in my family. Within 2 days of my conversation with Emma about her inheritance, both Tom and Linda were at my front door, united in their concern about my sudden wealth and what it meant for family relationships. "We need to talk," Linda announced, pushing past me into the living room, where Tom was already making himself comfortable on my couch. "About what?" I asked, though I knew exactly what was coming. "About this money situation," Tom said. "Emma told us David left some kind of trust fund. We're worried about how this is affecting your judgment." I almost laughed. David's notebook had predicted this conversation nearly word for word. "Once they know about the money, they'll band together and try to convince you that keeping it is somehow selfish or wrong." "My judgment seems fine to me," I said. "What exactly are you worried about?" Linda leaned forward with her practiced, concerned sister expression. "Maggie, honey, we understand that David wanted to take care of you, but this kind of money changes people. Look how you've been treating Emma, cutting off her credit cards, making demands. That's not like you. You're right. It's not like the old me. The old me would have already given both of you whatever you asked for without question." Tom and Linda exchanged glances. "Is that so wrong?" Tom asked. "We're family. Families help each other." "Help goes both ways, Tom. When was the last time either of you helped me?" "We've always been there for you emotionally," Linda said quickly. "Really? Linda, you called me 3 times in the 6 months after David's funeral. 3 times. And 2 of those calls were to ask if I could babysit Jessica so you could go on dates." Linda's cheeks flushed. "I was dealing with my own problems. And Tom, you've never once asked how I was doing since David died. Every conversation we've had has been about something you needed." "That's not fair," Tom protested. "I've been supportive. Name one time." The silence stretched between us until Linda broke it with a different approach. "Look, we're not saying you should give away David's hard work. We're just saying that maybe it's not healthy to hoard it all for yourself when family members are struggling." There it was, the guilt trip David had warned me about. Hoarding it? I'm not hoarding anything. I'm being responsible with it. "But what about the rest of us?" Tom asked. "Don't you think David would have wanted his money to help his family?" "David's money is helping his family. It's helping his widow and his daughter exactly the way he intended." "What about his extended family?" Linda pressed. "We're struggling too, Maggie. My ex is 3 months behind on child support, and Jessica needs so many things for school. And I could really use that business loan," Tom added. "It's not like I'm asking for charity. I'd pay you back with interest." I looked at my siblings, really looked at them, and saw them clearly for perhaps the first time. Linda, who'd dropped out of college to marry her high school boyfriend, had a baby, then divorced him when she got bored with married life. She'd been struggling for 16 years, always because of circumstances beyond her control, never because of choices she'd made. Tom, who'd had dozens of business opportunities over the years, none of which had ever worked out because someone else always let him down, or the market wasn't right, or the timing was off. Never because he didn't research properly, didn't plan adequately, or didn't work hard enough. Here's what I think David would want, I said finally. He'd want his money. To help people who are trying to help themselves. We are trying to help ourselves, Linda protested. Are you? Linda, what steps have you taken to collect the child support your ex owes? Have you filed contempt of court papers? Have you contacted his employer about wage garnishment? That's complicated. It's not complicated. It's uncomfortable. There's a difference. I turned to Tom. And you, what business plan have you written for this food truck? What market research have you done? What's your projected profit and loss for the first 2 years? I don't need to do all that formal stuff. Yes, you do. That's exactly what you need to do. David spent months researching every business decision he made. He didn't throw money at opportunities. He investigated them. Linda's mask of concern was slipping. So what? We're just supposed to struggle while you sit on millions? You're supposed to solve your own problems like adults. I'm supposed to honor my husband's wishes and protect what he built. This is ridiculous, Tom said, standing up. You're acting like we're strangers asking for handouts. We're your family. Family doesn't steal wedding rings to buy concert tickets. Family doesn't only call when they need money. Family doesn't show up together to pressure someone into giving them cash. I stood up too, feeling stronger than I had in years. What you two are doing right now isn't family behavior. It's predatory behavior. Linda gasped dramatically. How? Can you say that? We love you. Really? Then why didn't either of you love me enough to check on me regularly after David died? Why didn't you love me enough to help with Emma when she started acting out? Why didn't you love me enough to visit on holidays without asking for something? The questions hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. We're here now, Tom said weakly. You're here because you found out I have money. That's not love, Tom. That's opportunism. Linda tried one more manipulation. Fine. Keep your money. But don't expect us to pretend everything is normal between us. Everything hasn't been normal between us for years, I replied. I was just too grief-stricken and guilt-ridden to notice. After they left, I sat in my quiet living room and felt profound relief. David had been right about everything. Their tactics, their motivations, their inability to see me as anything other than a resource to be tapped. He'd protected me from years of manipulation by people who claimed to love me but had never actually demonstrated that love through actions. That evening, Emma called. Mom, Uncle Tom, and Aunt Linda said you were really mean to them today. I was honest with them. Sometimes honesty feels mean to people who are used to manipulation working. They said you called them predators. I called their behavior predatory. There's a difference. They're family, Mom. Family is supposed to help each other. Emma, in the past 5 years, how much help have Uncle Tom and Aunt Linda given us? Not money, actual help. Time, effort, emotional support, silence. That's what I thought. Real family helps without being asked and loves without conditions. People who only show up when they want something aren't family. They're users with familiar DNA. But what if they really need help? Then they can earn help the same way everyone else does, by demonstrating that they're worth helping, by showing that they'll use help to improve their situations rather than just maintain their bad choices. You really have changed, Emma said quietly. Yes, I have. I've remembered who I was before I let grief make me weak and guilt make me stupid. Your father fell in love with a strong woman, Emma. It's time I started being her again. 3 weeks. After Emma moved in with Jessica's family, I got a call from Jessica's mother, Patricia. Her voice was strained with the kind of politeness that barely concealed frustration. Margaret, I think we need to discuss Emma's living situation. Of course. Is there a problem? Well, it's just that when Emma first came to stay, we thought it would be for a few days. It's been 3 weeks now, and she doesn't seem to have any plans to contribute or move forward. I wasn't surprised. What's been happening? She sleeps until noon, doesn't help with household chores, and expects us to provide meals and transportation. When I suggested she might want to look for a job, she said she was working through some family issues and needed time to process. I see. Margaret, I don't want to put you in an awkward position, but Emma also mentioned that there's significant money from David's estate that she'll be getting soon. She's been treating this like a temporary inconvenience rather than real life. David's prediction about Emma's behavior was playing out exactly as he'd written. She'll look for enabling adults to replace you if you start holding her accountable. Don't rescue her from the consequences of her choices. Patricia, I appreciate you calling. Emma is welcome to come home anytime she's ready to follow basic household rules and start acting like an adult. She said you've become unreasonable about money. I've become reasonable about money for the first time in 3 years. There's a difference. That afternoon, Emma called me, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. Mom, Mrs. Patterson is being really weird about me staying here. She's making all these passive-aggressive comments about jobs and independence. Maybe because you're 19 years old and acting like a child. I'm not acting like a child. I'm going through a difficult time. Emma, you've been going through a difficult time for 3 years. At some point, difficult times become your personality if you don't deal with them. That's not fair. Dad died. And it was tragic, and it affected both of us deeply. But using his death as an excuse to avoid growing up isn't honoring his memory. It's insulting it. I can't believe you're saying this to me. I can't believe it took me this long to say it. I took a deep breath. Emma, you have a choice to make. You can come home, get a job, start contributing to the household, and begin earning the respect and trust that will eventually give you access to your inheritance. Or you can continue this path and discover that the world doesn't owe you anything just because you've experienced loss. What's that supposed to mean? It means Patricia isn't going to support you indefinitely. It means other friends' families won't either. It means eventually you'll run out of people willing to enable your behavior, and you'll have to face reality. You're supposed to support me. You're my mother. I am supporting you. I'm supporting your growth into a functional adult, even though it's harder for both of us than just handing you money would be. 2 days later, Patricia called again. Margaret, I'm sorry, but I had to ask Emma to leave. Last night, Jessica caught her going through our medicine cabinet, and this morning some cash went missing from my purse. My heart sank. How much? $40. When I confronted her, she got defensive and accused Jessica of lying about the medicine cabinet. She said we were all turning against her just like you did. Where is she now? She left about an hour ago with her bags. She said she had other places to stay, but Emma didn't have other places to stay. Over the next week, I got calls from 3 different friends' parents, each with similar stories. Emma would show up with a sob story about her unreasonable mother, stay for a few days, then wear out her welcome with entitled behavior and small thefts. Finally, she called me from a gas station at 11 o'clock on a Friday night. Mom, I need you to come get me. Where are you? The Shell station on Route 9. I don't have anywhere to go. What happened to all your friends who were going to help you? It didn't work out. Emma, are you safe? Are you hurt? I'm fine. Just cold and hungry, and I don't have any money. Every maternal instinct I had screamed at me to get in the car immediately. But David's voice was stronger. The moment she realizes that choices have consequences is the moment she can start making better choices. Emma, you can come home. But if you do, you follow my rules. You get a job within 2 weeks. You contribute to household expenses. You treat our home and our relationship with respect. And you start therapy to work through your grief and anger in healthy ways instead of destructive ones. I don't need therapy. Then you don't need to come home. Silence. Then quietly, what if I can't find a job? You can find a job. You might not find the job you want, but you can find a job. Restaurants, retail stores, cleaning services. There are always jobs for people willing to work, but those are terrible jobs. No, Emma. Those are starter jobs. The jobs that teach you how to show up on time, how to follow instructions, how to work with difficult people, how to earn a paycheck. Your father started with terrible jobs. So did I. So does everyone who becomes successful. This is so unfair. What's unfair is spending 3 years wallowing in self-pity instead of building a life your father would be proud of. What's unfair is stealing from people who tried to help you. What's unfair is treating everyone who loves you like they exist solely to fund your lifestyle. I heard her crying on the other end of the line and it broke my heart. But I also heard something else. The sound of walls crumbling, of excuses running out, of reality finally penetrating 3 years of denial. Mom, I'm scared. I know, sweetheart. Growing up is scary, but you're not alone in it. if you're willing to do the work. Will you come get me? Are you ready to come home and be the person your father raised you to be? A long pause. Then, in a voice smaller than I'd heard from her, in years. I think so. Then I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I drove to pick up my daughter, I said a silent thank you to David. He'd known this moment would come. The moment when Emma would have to choose between continuing down a destructive path or finding the courage to change. He'd prepared me to be strong enough to let her fall so she could learn to stand. Driving to pick up Emma from that gas station, David's ring felt heavy on my finger, not just with metal, but with meaning. It had started this entire journey, this transformation from grieving doormat to empowered woman. Now, as I prepared to give my daughter one last chance, the ring seemed to pulse with David's presence. When I pulled into the gas station, Emma was sitting on the curb with her bags beside her, looking younger and more vulnerable than I'd seen her in years. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her hair was tangled, and for the first time since David's funeral, she looked like she'd been crying real tears instead of manipulative ones. She got into the passenger seat without her usual dramatic flair. Just quiet exhaustion. "Thank you for coming," she said simply. "I told you I would." We drove in silence for several minutes before Emma spoke again. "Mom, I need to tell you something about Dad's ring." My stomach clenched. "What about it?" "When I took it to the pawn shop, the guy told me it was worth way more than $60. He said there were engravings inside that made it special, that a collector would probably pay hundreds for it. I know. I got it back from Harold Chen. But here's the thing. I knew it was worth more. And I sold it anyway because I was angry at you for treating me like a child." Her voice was shaking. "I wanted to hurt you the way you were hurting me by setting boundaries." I pulled over to the side of the road and turned to look at her. "Emma, I'm not done. The worst part is that while I was staying at Jessica's house, I kept thinking about Dad and how disappointed he'd be in me. Not just for selling the ring, but for everything. For not working. For stealing from people who tried to help me. For treating you like garbage when you were just trying to take care of me." Tears were streaming down her face now, and these weren't the calculated tears she'd used for manipulation. These were the raw, ugly tears of genuine remorse. I kept remembering this thing Dad used to say when I was little. "Remember?" He'd say, "Emma Bear, the measure of a person isn't what they do when times are easy. It's what they do when times are hard." I did remember. David had said that to both of us countless times. Times have been hard since he died, and I've been a terrible person. I've been selfish and mean and entitled, and I've dishonored everything he taught me. She wiped her nose with her sleeve. "I don't even know who I became." "You became a scared 19-year-old who lost her father," I said gently. "That doesn't excuse your choices, but it explains them. I want to be better, Mom. I really do, but I don't know how." I reached over and took her hand. "You start by making one good choice. Then another, then another. You start by getting up tomorrow and looking for a job instead of looking for excuses. What if I mess up again? Then you try again." That's what your father would do. When we got home, Emma went straight to David's photo on the mantel. She stood there for a long time, just looking at his face. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered. "I'm going to try to make you proud again." The next morning, Emma was up at 8 o'clock, dressed in the most professional clothes she owned, with a stack of job applications she'd printed from the computer. "I'm going to hit every store in the mall, every restaurant on Main Street, and every business that might be hiring," she announced over breakfast. "Even if it's just minimum wage, even if it's part-time, I'm going to find something." "What changed your mind?" She held up her phone, showing me a photo she'd taken of David's ring. "I've been staring at this all morning. This ring represents everything Dad worked for, everything he valued. When I sold it, I was selling away the memory of a man who never gave up on anything. He never gave up on you either." "I know. And I'm not going to give up on me anymore either." Emma spent that entire day going from business to business. She came home exhausted but determined, with 3 applications that had shown genuine interest, and promises to call back within the week. "The manager at the diner said they need weekend breakfast servers," she reported. "It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and the tips can be decent if you're good at it. Your father would be proud of you for even applying." "I hope so. I have a lot of making up to do." That evening, Emma asked if she could see David's ring again. I slipped it off my finger and handed it to her, watching as she turned it over in her hands. The engravings inside, what do they mean? I told her about the coordinates, the safety deposit box, the wealth David had accumulated and hidden to protect us from exactly the kind of behavior she'd been displaying. So, when I sold this ring, I was literally selling away the key to Dad's entire legacy? In a way, yes. She stared at the ring for a long moment. Mom, I don't want the money from the trust. What do you mean? I mean, I want to earn the right to it. I want to prove I'm the kind of person Dad raised me to be before I get access to anything he left behind. She handed the ring back to me. This ring should stay with you until I've proven I deserve to inherit Dad's values along with his money. Emma, the money will be there when you're ready for it. I know. But right now, I need to learn who I am when I can't rely on anyone else's money. I need to discover what I'm capable of when I have to depend on myself. I slipped the ring back onto my finger, feeling David's presence more strongly than I had since his death. Somehow, through all the pain and struggle, his plan was working. Emma was finally ready to become the woman he'd always believed she could be. There's one more thing, Emma said. I want to pay you back for all the money I've wasted over the past 3 years. Every credit card charge, every frivolous purchase, every dollar I took without earning. I'm going to keep track, and I'm going to pay it all back. Emma, that's not necessary. Yes, it is. Dad taught me that debts should be paid, even debts to people who love you, especially debts to people who love you. That night, I sat in David's office, surrounded by all the documents that revealed the true scope of his planning. He'd foreseen every challenge, prepared for every possibility, protected us from every threat, including the threat of our own weaknesses. The ring on my finger caught the lamplight, and I could swear I felt David's approval. His greatest treasure hadn't been the money he'd accumulated or the businesses he'd built. It had been the belief that the people he loved could become worthy of the love he'd given them. Now, finally, we were proving him right. Emma got the job at the diner. She started the following Monday, working the breakfast and lunch shifts on weekends. I watched her set her alarm for 5:30 a.m. on Saturday morning, something I hadn't seen her do voluntarily in years. I'm nervous, she admitted as she tied her hair back and put on the black pants and white shirt the restaurant required. What if I'm terrible at it? Then you'll get better, I said. Your father was terrible at running a business when he first inherited the shop. He learned by making mistakes and fixing them. Did you ever doubt he'd succeed? Never. Not because I was sure he'd succeed, but because I was sure he'd never stop trying. Emma worked her first shift and came home exhausted, but proud. I only dropped one plate, and the cook said, that was pretty good for a first day. My feet are killing me, but I made $43 in tips. How does it feel? Hard. But good hard, if that makes sense. Like I accomplished something real. It was during Emma's second week at the diner that we had to address the legal implications of her past behavior. Patricia, Jessica's mother, called to say she'd found additional items missing from her home after Emma's stay. I hate to do this, Margaret, but I need to report this to the police. It's not just about the money, it's about the pattern of behavior. If Emma is stealing from multiple families, parents need to know. My heart sank, but I understood. Patricia, you're absolutely right. What did she take? Jessica's gold bracelet, a graduation gift from her grandmother, and my prescription medication for anxiety. The bracelet was worth about $200. But the medication theft is more serious. After I hung up, I sat Emma down and explained what was happening. They're going to press charges? Her face went pale. They have every right to. Emma, theft is a crime, regardless of who you steal from or why you think you needed to do it. But I can pay them back now. I have job money. This isn't about money anymore. It's about consequences. It's about the fact that actions have legal implications when you're an adult. What should I do? You should call Patricia, apologize sincerely, and ask if there's a way to handle this without involving the police. But Emma, understand that she has no obligation to give you that opportunity. Emma made the call that evening. I listened from the kitchen as she spoke to Patricia, her voice shaking with genuine remorse. Mrs. Patterson, my mom told me you found more things missing. I need to confess. I did take Jessica's bracelet and your pills. I was angry and scared and making terrible decisions, but that's not an excuse. She paused, listening. I understand. If you need to call the police, I deserve whatever consequences come from this. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. When Emma hung up, she was crying. She's going to think about it. She wants to talk to Jessica and her husband first. Emma wiped her eyes. Mom, what if I go to jail? Then you'll face that consequence too. Emma, this is what growing up means. Accepting responsibility for your choices, even when the consequences are scary. But what about my job? What about trying to get better? Getting better doesn't erase the damage you've already done. You can't undo the past by promising to do better in the future. You have to make amends for what you've already broken. The next 3 days were the longest of Emma's life. She went to work at the diner, came home, and spent her evenings researching the legal implications of theft charges. She learned about restitution, community service, and how a criminal record could affect her future employment opportunities. I could lose everything, she said one night, staring at legal websites on her laptop. You could. Is that making you want to give up? Or is it making you more determined to prove you've changed? More determined, but also terrified. Good. Fear of consequences is what keeps most people honest. You've been operating without that fear for too long. Finally, Patricia called back. Margaret, Jessica, and I have talked extensively about this situation. We've decided not to press charges, but with conditions. What kind of conditions? Emma needs to return the bracelet, which I assume she no longer has since she pawned it. She needs to pay full restitution for its value. She needs to complete 50 hours of community service at a local charity. And she needs to write letters of apology to every family she stole from during her weeks of couch surfing. That's very generous of you. It's not generosity, Margaret. It's an investment in the hope that Emma can still become the person her father wanted her to be. When I told Emma about Patricia's conditions, she didn't complain about their severity. Instead, she immediately began calculating how many weeks of diner tips it would take to pay restitution for the bracelet. $200 plus whatever I owe the other families, she said, making notes on a piece of paper. If I save half my tips every week, I can probably pay everyone back within 2 months. What about the community service? I already called the local food bank. They said they need volunteers to help sort donations and serve meals. I can do 10 hours a week on my days off from the diner. And the apology letters? Emma's face flushed with shame. Those are going to be the hardest part. How do you apologize? For being the kind of person who steals from people trying to help you. You start by acknowledging exactly what you did wrong, without making excuses. Then you explain what you're doing to change. Then you ask for forgiveness without expecting to receive it. What if they don't forgive me? Then they don't. Forgiveness isn't something you earn, Emma. It's something people choose to give. Your job is to become worthy of it, whether you receive it or not. Emma spent that weekend writing her apology letters. She wrote draft after draft, each one more honest and less self-pitying than the last. I watched her struggle with the words. Watched her face the full scope of her behavior without flinching. I'm realizing I hurt a lot more people than I thought, she said, surrounded by crumpled papers. Every family that tried to help me, I betrayed their trust. That's not just stealing money. That's stealing their willingness to help other people who might really need it. Now you understand the real cost of your choices. Yeah, and it's way more expensive than I thought. The letters went out on Monday. Emma didn't hear back from most of the families, but the 2 who did respond surprised her. One family wrote back to say they appreciated her honesty and were proud of her efforts to make amends. The other invited her to visit so they could see firsthand that she was really changing. They want to meet with me? Emma was amazed. Some people believe in second chances, especially when they see genuine effort to earn them. I don't deserve their kindness. No, you don't. But that's what makes it kindness instead of justice. Your job now is to prove their faith in you wasn't misplaced. That night, as Emma prepared for another early morning at the diner, she came to my room holding David's photo. I've been talking to Dad every night before bed, she said, telling him about my day, about the people I'm trying to make things right with. I know it probably sounds silly. It doesn't sound silly at all. I tell him I'm sorry I disappointed him, and I promise I'm going to keep working to become someone he'd be proud of again. She looked at the photo with such tenderness. Do you think he can hear me? I thought about David's ring on my finger, about his elaborate plans to protect and guide us, about the way his wisdom continued to shape our choices even 3 years after his death. I think your father is closer than you know, sweetheart, and I think he's been waiting for this version of you to come back. 3 months into Emma's transformation, I found a letter on my pillow one evening. It was written in Emma's careful handwriting on the good stationery she'd bought with her own money, a small luxury she'd allowed herself after paying off all her restitution debts. Dear Mom, it began. I've been trying to write this letter for weeks, but I keep starting over because words feel too small for what I need to say. I sat on the bed and read the rest. I need you to know that I remember the exact moment I became the person you had to stop enabling. It was about 6 months after Dad died, when you were crying in the kitchen because you couldn't figure out how to pay for the car repair and Emma's school clothes at the same time. Instead of offering to get a job or help somehow, I got annoyed that your crying was interrupting my TV show. That was the moment I stopped seeing you as a person with your own struggles and started seeing you as just a source of money and comfort. I'm so ashamed of that girl, Mom. I'm ashamed of how cruel I became, how entitled, how completely blind to your sacrifice and pain. Working at the diner has taught me things I never understood before. I've learned what it feels like to be exhausted from honest work, to earn every dollar through effort and kindness to strangers. I've learned that most people work incredibly hard for what they have, and that no one owes me anything just because I exist. But more than that, I've learned what Dad was trying to teach me all those years when he insisted I earn my allowance, when he made me get a job the summer I turned 16, when he said money isn't magic, Emma, it's work made visible. I thought I was being smart by selling his ring for quick cash. I didn't understand that I was selling the symbol of everything he'd worked to build, everything he'd planned to leave us. I was literally trading his legacy for instant gratification. The worst part is realizing how much I hurt you when you were already in so much pain. You were grieving your husband, trying to figure out how to be a single parent, probably scared about money and the future, and instead of being your daughter and teammate, I became another problem you had to solve. I know I can't undo the past 3 years. I can't give you back the peace of mind I stole, or the money I wasted, or the trust I broke, but I can promise you that the entitled, cruel person I became is gone forever. She died the night you left me at that gas station, and I'm grateful she did. The person writing this letter knows the value of work, understands the weight of responsibility, and finally comprehends what Dad meant when he said that character is built through struggle, not comfort. I have more to say, but I think I should say it in person. Can we talk tomorrow after I get home from my shift? All my love and respect, Emma P.S. I've been saving money for something special, and I think I'm finally ready to spend it. The next evening, Emma came home from the diner with a small wrapped package. She'd been working double shifts all week, and the exhaustion showed in her face. But there was also something else, a quiet pride I hadn't seen since she was a child, showing me a perfect test score. Before I give you this, I need to tell you some things I should have said a long time ago, she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. I'm listening. First, I need to tell you that you're an amazing mother. Not because you gave me everything I wanted, but because you finally loved me enough to let me fail. The night you left me at the gas station was the night I learned that love sometimes looks like letting someone hit bottom so they can push themselves back up. That was the hardest thing I've ever done, I know. And it saved me. If you'd rescued me one more time, I would have kept believing that someone else would always solve my problems. She took a shaky breath. Second, I need to tell you that I understand now what Dad was protecting us from. He knew that easy money would ruin me, that I needed to learn who I was when I had to depend on myself. He loved you enough to make your inheritance conditional. He loved me enough to believe I could earn it. That's the greatest gift a parent can give a child, the belief that they're capable of becoming worthy of good things. Emma pushed the wrapped package across the table. This is for you. Inside was a small, simple gold ring with an inscription on the inside, for Margaret, who taught me that strength looks like saying no. Love, Emma. Emma, this is beautiful, but you didn't need to. Yes, I did. You lost your wedding ring partner when Dad died, and then you had to take his ring back from people who'd stolen it. I wanted you to have a ring that represents the new relationship we're building, the one where I respect you enough to be honest, and you trust me enough to have Expectations. I slipped the ring onto my right hand, next to David's wedding band. It's perfect. There's something else. I've been thinking about Dad's trust fund, about all the conditions he put on my inheritance. What about it? I don't want to access any of it until I'm 30, just like he planned. But I want to add some conditions of my own. What kind of conditions? I want to prove that I can support myself completely before I get any help from his money. I want to finish college while working, save up for my own apartment, maybe even start a small business. I want to show Dad and you that I can build something with my own hands before I accept what he built with his. I felt tears starting. Emma, that's a beautiful sentiment. But you don't have to make things harder on yourself than they need to be. Yes, I do. For 3 years, I took the easy path, and it turned me into someone I'm ashamed of. I need to take the hard path now, not because I'm punishing myself, but because I'm finally strong enough to handle it. What about college? That money could... I'm going to apply for financial aid and scholarships like everyone else. If I can't afford the school I want, I'll start at community college and transfer. If it takes me longer to graduate because I'm working, that's fine. The diploma will mean more if I earn it completely. I looked at this young woman who had somehow emerged from the wreckage of the entitled teenager I'd been enabling. She was thinner from working long hours. Her hands were rougher from washing dishes, and there were circles under her eyes from early mornings. But there was also a strength in her posture, a clarity in her eyes that reminded me powerfully of David. Your father would be so proud of you. I hope so. But more importantly, I'm finally proud of me. She reached across the table and took my hand. Mom, I know I can't undo the pain I caused you, but I want you to know that I see you clearly now. You're not just my mother. You're a strong, intelligent woman who deserves respect and kindness, not manipulation and demands. It took me a while to remember that myself. We both forgot who we were for a while, but we found our way back. She smiled, and for the first time in years, it was the smile of the little girl who used to help David in his garage. Do you think Dad knew this would happen? Do you think he knew that making things harder for us would actually make us stronger? I thought about David's notebook, his detailed planning, his absolute faith that love combined with wisdom could guide people toward their best selves. I think your father knew that the people he loved were capable of extraordinary things, even when they couldn't see it themselves. I think he believed that given the right incentives and enough support, we'd find our way to becoming the women he always knew we could be. Then I guess we better keep proving him right. That night, as I got ready for bed, I looked at my reflection wearing both rings, David's wedding band representing the love that had shaped my past, and Emma's gift representing the respect that would define our future. For the first time since David's death, I felt complete, not because my grief was gone, but because I'd finally become strong enough to carry it with grace. The transformation in our household was remarkable, but the real test came when we had to rebuild relationships with the extended family. Tom and Linda had been conspicuously absent since our confrontation about David's money, but I knew they wouldn't stay away forever. Money has a way of drawing people back, especially when they think enough time has passed for grudges to fade. The first overture came from Linda, who called on a Tuesday evening just as Emma and I were finishing dinner. Hi, Margaret. I've been thinking about our last conversation, and I wanted to apologize if I came across as pushy about the money situation. Thank you for calling, Linda. I was wondering if we could get together sometime. Maybe Emma would like to see her cousin Jessica. Emma, who could hear Linda's voice through the phone, made a face and mouthed, "Absolutely not." 3 months of working at the diner had given her strong opinions about people who didn't work for what they had. I think Emma's pretty busy with work and college applications, I said. Work? Emma has a job? She's been working at Morrison's diner for 3 months. Weekends and some evenings. Silence. Then, that's wonderful. I had no idea she was being so responsible. She's been very responsible, we both have. Well, maybe we could all get together for dinner sometime. I'd love to hear about how you're both doing. I looked at Emma, who was shaking her head vigorously. Let me talk to Emma and get back to you. After I hung up, Emma was clear about her feelings. Mom, I know she's your sister, but I'm not ready to pretend everything is normal with people who only care about us when they think we might give them money. That's very mature of you. Working with the public teaches you to spot people's real motivations pretty quickly. Aunt Linda didn't call because she missed us. She called because she heard I have a job And maybe that means you're loosening up about money. Emma was right, of course. Over the next few weeks, we got similar calls from Tom, from my cousin Rachel, and even from my mother, who hadn't spoken to me in 6 months. Each conversation followed the same pattern: casual small talk, expressions of concern about how we were doing, and careful probing about our new situation. It's like they all got together and decided it was time to test the waters, Emma observed after my mother's call. Probably because someone told them you have a job and they think that means I'm softening. Are you? Softening, I mean? About you? Yes. About them? Not even a little. The real test came when Linda showed up unannounced on a Saturday afternoon, just as Emma was getting ready for her evening shift at the diner. She brought Jessica with her, clearly hoping that the cousin connection would make refusal impossible. We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by, Linda said, though. We lived 20 minutes from anywhere she normally went. Emma handled the situation with a maturity that amazed me. Hi, Aunt Linda. Hi, Jessica. I'd love to catch up, but I have to leave for work in 10 minutes. Work on a Saturday? Linda asked, as if the concept was foreign. I work most weekends. The diner is busiest on Saturday evenings, so the tips are better. Tips? You're waiting tables? I am. It's honest work, and I'm good at it. Emma's voice was steady, proud. I've been promoted to head server for the breakfast shift. Jessica, who was a year younger than Emma, looked confused. But don't you want to just hang out and have fun? You're only 19. I have plenty of fun, Emma replied. There's something really satisfying about earning your own money, about being able to pay for things yourself. You should try it sometime. Linda's smile was getting strained. Well, it's wonderful that you're learning responsibility, but surely you don't need to work quite so much. I work as much as I choose to. Work. And right now, I choose to work a lot because I have goals I'm saving for. What kind of goals? Emma looked at me for permission, and I nodded. I'm saving money to start college next fall. I want to study business, maybe learn how to run a restaurant or start my own company someday. But surely Margaret could help. With college costs? I'm sure Mom could help with a lot of things, Emma said carefully. But I want to earn my education myself. It'll mean more that way. After Emma left for work, Linda's real purpose became clear. Margaret, I'm worried about Emma. This obsession with working and earning everything herself. It seems extreme, almost like she's punishing herself for something. She's not punishing herself. She's building character. But making a teenager work so hard when there's family money available? It seems cruel. Linda, Emma is 19, not a teenager, and she chose this path herself. I offered to help with college, and she turned me down because she wants to earn it. That's not normal. Margaret, most kids her age want their parents to pay for everything. Maybe that's the problem with most kids her age. Linda tried a different approach. I've been thinking about our conversation a few months ago, about family helping each other. I realize I may have been insensitive about David's death and how it affected you financially. Go on. What I mean is, I understand now that you probably don't have as much money as we thought. That's why Emma has to work, right? That's why you can't help with Jessica's braces or Tom's business idea? I almost laughed. Linda had constructed an entire narrative that made my refusal to give them money into a story about my own financial struggles. It was easier for her to believe I was poor than to accept that I was simply choosing not to enable them. Linda, my financial situation is exactly what it was 3 months ago. But then why? Because I finally learned the difference between helping people and enabling them. Because I realized that giving someone money they haven't earned doesn't actually help them. It weakens them. That's a very harsh philosophy. It's the philosophy that turned David from a poor kid who inherited a failing auto shop into a successful businessman. It's the philosophy that's turning Emma from an entitled brat into a responsible young woman. So you're saying you won't help family anymore? Ever? I'm saying I'll help family members who are helping themselves. If Jessica wants to start a college fund and needs matching contributions, I'm interested. If Tom wants to take business classes and needs tuition help, I'm listening. But if you want me to pay for Jessica's braces while you spend your money on designer purses, or if Tom wants me to fund his business idea while he refuses to write a business plan, then no, those aren't the same thing. Yes, they are. They're both situations where people want me to solve problems they could solve themselves if they made different choices. Linda left without accomplishing whatever she'd hoped to accomplish, but her visit served a purpose for me. It clarified exactly where I stood with my extended family and confirmed that my new boundaries were necessary. That evening, when Emma came home from work, she found me sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad, writing. "What are you working on?" "A family charter," I said. "A document that explains our new rules for family relationships." "What kind of rules?" "Rules about respect, about reciprocity, about the difference between helping and enabling. Rules that make it clear what we expect from family and what family can expect from us." Emma read over my shoulder as I wrote. "The Sullivan family believes in love expressed through high expectations, support offered to those who support themselves, and generosity earned through character rather than demanded through relationship." "That's perfect, Mom. Dad would approve." "I think you're right. I think he'd say it was about time we started living like people who understood the value of what we've been given." The charter became our foundation for rebuilding family relationships. On our terms, some relatives rose to meet our expectations. Others chose to stay away rather than change their approach. But for the first time since David's death, our family felt strong enough to stand on its own principles, regardless of who chose to stand with us. 6 months after Emma's transformation began, we received an unexpected visitor. Richard Hartwell called to say that someone had been asking questions about David's estate. Specifically, a young man named Marcus who claimed to have worked for David years ago. "He says he has information about David that you might want to hear," Richard explained. "Something about a project David was working on before he died." Marcus turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his early 30s who had worked as a mechanic in one of David's shops when he was just out of high school. We met him at Richard's office on a gray October afternoon, and what he told us changed everything. "I thought I knew about my husband's final months. Mr. Sullivan saved my life," Marcus began simply. "I was 18, aging out of foster care, with nowhere to go and no real skills. I was angry at the world and probably headed for serious trouble. David hired me when no one else would, taught me about cars, but more importantly, taught me about being a man." Emma leaned forward, fascinated. "What do you mean? Your father didn't just give me a job. He gave me a blueprint for building a life. He helped me get my GED, encouraged me to take night classes, matched every dollar I saved for my education. When I graduated from community college with an automotive technology degree, he helped me start my own shop." "I never knew David was mentoring anyone," I said. "He was mentoring lots of people, Mrs. Sullivan. That's why I'm here." Marcus pulled out a thick folder. "In the months before he died, your husband was working on something he called the Sullivan Foundation. He'd researched dozens of charities that help at-risk youth, but he wasn't satisfied with any of them." "What was wrong with them?" "He said they were either too big to be personal or too small to make a real impact. He wanted to create something different, something that would find kids like me and give them the same kind of individual attention he'd given me." Marcus opened the folder, revealing detailed notes in David's handwriting. He'd identified 20 young people in the area who reminded him of himself at that age. Kids from broken homes, kids in foster care, kids who'd made mistakes but still had potential. He was planning to fund their education, their training, their first business ventures. 20 young people? Emma's eyes were wide. The plan was to start with 20, then expand as the foundation grew. He'd calculated that with proper mentoring and financial support, each person could become self-sufficient and eventually help mentor others. He called it sustainable impact. I stared at David's familiar handwriting, his careful diagrams showing how one investment in a person could ripple outward to affect their families, their communities, their future mentees. It was brilliant and ambitious and completely like him. "Why didn't he tell me about this?" "He wanted to surprise you," Marcus said gently. "He planned to present it as a Christmas gift, not just the foundation, but the opportunity for you and Emma to be involved in running it. He saw it as the family business you'd build together after Emma graduated." Emma was reading over the plans, tears streaming down her face. "He was going to ask me to help run a foundation? He believed you had the potential to be an extraordinary leader, Emma. But he also knew you needed to understand the value of hard work before you could help others learn it." Everything clicked into place. David's secrecy about his wealth, his elaborate trust conditions, his detailed observations about our character development. It had all been leading to this. He hadn't just been protecting his money, he'd been preparing us to use it meaningfully. Marcus, what happened to these 20 young people? That's the thing, Mrs. Sullivan. They're all still out there, still struggling with the same problems David identified. Some have gotten into serious trouble since then. Others are just stuck, working dead-end jobs, not believing they're capable of more. And you think we should continue his plan? I think David's vision was brilliant. And I think you and Emma have become exactly the people he hoped you'd be, people strong enough to help others build strength. Over the next few weeks, Emma and I studied David's foundation plans obsessively. He'd thought of everything: selection criteria for candidates, mentorship protocols, educational partnerships, success metrics, expansion strategies. It was a 20-year business plan for changing lives. Mom, we have to do this, Emma said one evening as we spread David's documents across the kitchen table. This is what all the money was really for, isn't it? Not just to take care of us, but to take care of people like us, people who need someone to believe in them. It's a huge responsibility, Emma. These would be real people counting on us. Real people who are counting on someone. If not us, then who? Are you sure you're ready for this? You're just starting college, just figuring out your own life. I'm ready because I just figured out my own life. I know what it's like to be lost, to make terrible choices, to need someone to believe in you even when you don't believe in yourself. She picked up one of David's candidate profiles, a 17-year-old girl in foster care with excellent grades but no money for college. This could have been me, Mom, if Dad had died when I was younger, if you hadn't been strong enough to save me from myself. We spent the next month meeting with Marcus and Richard, refining David's plans, adding our own insights based on what we'd learned about growth through struggle. Emma suggested adding a peer mentorship component, pairing new candidates with program graduates who could relate to their specific challenges. People listen differently when advice comes from someone who's walked the same path, she said. That's why Dad's influence was so powerful with Marcus. He'd built himself up from nothing, so Marcus believed it was possible. The David Sullivan Foundation launched on what would have been David's 46th birthday. Our first class consisted of 12 young people between the ages of 16 and 22. Emma took a leave of absence from her diner job to work as the foundation's coordinator, throwing herself into the work with the same intensity she'd once devoted to partying. I finally understand what Dad meant about work feeling like purpose, she told me after our first group mentorship session. When you're helping someone believe in themselves, it doesn't feel like work at all. The foundation gave us a way to honor David's memory that went far beyond preserving his business or managing his investments. We were continuing his life's work, the business of seeing potential in people and giving them the tools to realize. 6 months after the foundation's launch, Emma and I stood in David's old office, now converted into the foundation's headquarters. The walls were covered with photos of our mentees, graduation pictures, business opening ceremonies, acceptance letters to colleges and trade schools. Do you think he knew? Emma asked, straightening a photo of our newest graduate, a young man who'd gone from homeless to homeowner in 2 years. Do you think Dad knew that losing him would teach us what we needed to know to continue his work? I touched David's ring, still on my finger after all these months. I think your father understood that love isn't just about taking care of someone. It's about preparing them to take care of others. Everything he did, every plan he made, was designed to make us strong enough to carry on something bigger than ourselves. Then we're living his true legacy. Yes, I said, watching Emma review applications from our next class of candidates. We're living his true legacy, and we're creating our own. 1 year after Emma sold David's wedding ring, we sat in Richard Hartwell's office for what we knew would be our final meeting about David's estate. The trust documents were being updated to reflect the foundation's establishment, and Emma was officially signing papers that would delay her personal inheritance until she turned 30. Her choice, made freely and with full understanding of what she was giving up. Are you absolutely certain about this, Emma? Richard asked as she signed the final document. You're essentially choosing to work for your inheritance rather than simply receiving it. I'm choosing to earn my inheritance. The same way Dad earned everything he had, Emma replied. Through work that matters, through helping other people, through becoming someone worthy of the responsibility that comes with wealth. And if the foundation fails, if you change your mind, then I'll learn from the failure and try something else. But I won't change my mind about earning what I get. Dad taught me that gifts create dependence, but earned rewards create strength. As we walked out of Richard's office, Emma was glowing with the kind of satisfaction I remembered from David's face after particularly meaningful accomplishments. Mom, I need to tell you something. What's that? I'm not angry anymore. About Dad dying, about the unfairness of it, about having to grow up faster than I wanted to. I'm not angry because I finally understand that everything he did, including dying, taught me something I needed to learn. What did it teach you? That love isn't about making someone's life easy. Love is about making someone strong enough to handle whatever life brings them. Dad didn't just love us. He prepared us. Even his death was a lesson in resilience. Drove home through the town where David had built his first business, past the diner where Emma still worked one shift a week to stay connected to the people she served, past the community college where 3 of our foundation mentees were studying automotive technology. Everything felt connected, purposeful, part of a larger story that David had begun, and we were continuing. That evening, as had become our tradition, Emma and I sat down to review applications for the next round of foundation candidates. The stories were heartbreaking and hopeful in equal measure. A 16-year-old girl who'd been in 8 foster homes but maintained a 4.0 GPA. A 20-year-old man who'd overcome addiction and wanted to become a counselor. A teenage mother who dreamed of opening her own daycare center. This one, Emma said, handing me an application. This is exactly the kind of person Dad would have chosen. The application was from an 18-year-old named Sarah, whose father had died in a workplace accident, leaving her to care for her younger siblings while her mother struggled with depression. Despite everything, Sarah had graduated high school with honors and was desperate to attend college but had no way to pay for it. She reminds me of you, I said, before you lost your way. She reminds me of the person I could have been if I'd learned Dad's lessons sooner. Emma made a note on Sarah's file. I want to mentor her personally. That's a big commitment. It's the right commitment. Dad mentored Marcus personally, and look how that turned out. Some people need individual attention to really believe someone cares about their success. As Emma worked on her mentee selections, I updated the foundation's budget projections. David's wealth was growing, even as we spent it on others. The businesses he'd built continued to generate income. The properties he'd bought continued to appreciate, and the investments he'd made continued to compound. We could sustain the current level of giving indefinitely and expand it significantly as the foundation grew. But the real growth was in us. Emma had evolved from an entitled teenager into a compassionate leader who understood that privilege came with responsibility. I had transformed from a grieving widow who let people take advantage of her kindness into a strong woman who used her resources strategically to create positive change. Mom, I want to show you something, Emma said, pulling out her phone. Sarah sent this video when she found out she'd been accepted into our program. The video showed a young woman crying with joy as she read our acceptance letter aloud to her siblings. We're going to college, she told them. The David Sullivan Foundation is going to help me become a teacher, and then I'm going to come back and help other people go to college too. That's the ripple effect Dad was planning for, Emma said. Every person we help will eventually help others. In 20 years, there could be hundreds of people living better lives because we continued his work. In 20 years, you'll be the one leading this foundation. We'll be leading it together. That's what partnerships are for. I looked at my daughter, no longer the cruel, entitled young woman who'd sold her father's ring, but a mature adult who understood that wealth was a tool for building rather than just acquiring. David's plan had worked perfectly. The struggle had created the character had earned the responsibility, and the responsibility had generated the wisdom to use wealth meaningfully. That night, I sat in David's old office, now filled with foundation files and photos of the young people we were helping. I slipped his ring off my finger and held it up to the light, reading the coordinates that had started this entire journey. The coordinates hadn't just led me to David's money, they'd led me to David's mission. The ring hadn't just contained the location of his wealth, It had contained the blueprint for our purpose. I put the ring back on and picked up my pen to finish the Foundation's annual report. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "The David Sullivan Foundation exists because love is not a feeling. It is an action. It is the deliberate choice to prepare the people we care about for the challenges they will face, to give them tools rather than handouts, to build their strength rather than their dependence." Below that, I added, "This year, we have learned that the greatest inheritance is not money, but the wisdom to use money well. We have discovered that the most valuable gift is not comfort, but the confidence that comes from overcoming difficulty. We have found that the truest love is not the kind that makes life easy, but the kind that makes people strong enough to make life meaningful." As I worked, I felt David's presence more strongly than I had since his death, not as grief or longing, but as ongoing partnership. He had given us everything we needed, not just the financial resources, but the moral framework to use them wisely. We were living proof that his plan had worked, that love combined with wisdom could guide people toward their best selves. Emma appeared in the doorway, home from her evening classes at the university. "Working late? Finishing our annual report. Want to help?" She pulled up a chair beside me, and we worked together in comfortable silence, planning the next year's expansion, reviewing success stories, dreaming about the lives we might touch. Outside, the town David had loved was quiet, but inside his office, his work continued, carried forward by the two women he had loved enough to make strong, wise enough to be trusted with his legacy, and grateful enough to spend their lives, honoring his memory by helping others discover their own potential. The ring on my finger caught the desk light one final time, and I smiled. David had been right about everything. Love was action, strength came through struggle, and the greatest wealth was the ability to help others become wealthy in spirit, purpose, and hope. His legacy lived on, not in the money he'd left us, but in the people we'd become because of how he'd loved us. And that legacy would continue rippling outward, one transformed life at a time, for as long as we had the wisdom to remember his greatest lesson, that the measure of a life is not what you accumulate, but what you create with what you've been given.